Who is that?
Good evening, everyone. I'm calling the meeting of the Charter Revision Commission in progress. Please take roll call.
Tyler Fairbairn,
Here.
Patsy Brescia,
Here.
Rick McQuaid,
Here.
Angela Wasuna,
Here.
Benita Raleigh Watford,
Here.
Michael Witherspoon.
He's gonna be a little late.
He's there. Yeah, I see him on there. Yep. Noted. And Carl Dickens.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum. Everyone is in attendance.
You said Benita?
Yep.
No, sorry. Okay. So you have a copy.
Let me just touch that. I'll get rid of that white block. There you go.
You have the minutes from our previous meeting, October 26th. Anyone make a motion on these minutes, please?
So move on.
Okay,
I'll second.
Okay.
I didn't find anything that
yeah.
I thought.
okay. I did, and it's on at the end of page 6, at pretty much at the end of our meeting, where a question came up about term limits, and Council Steve instructed us that this was under the auspices of the state. And then we had a general discussion that he had advised many towns and cities in the state of Connecticut. And I recall him stating that he had been counsel to 9 of the largest 12 cities in Connecticut on that issue as well. And I think it's important that that's in our minutes. So if somebody would second my correction to the minutes.
I'll second.
Does anyone else have any corrections to the minutes?
Just a couple minor spelling things for people.
Sure, yes.
To do that now.
Yeah. Yes, let's do it.
So, Colin Hostin, who's an E in
Oh.
Hostin,
Okay,
and was Diane
Laura,
Marcella and Diana Carpio. The Diane and the Diana were transposed.
okay.
That's
So a motion to move forward with the minutes with those two or 3 changes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I see no opposition, so the motion is carried. So we are not having public comments tonight, but we're going to move into the very important presentation from Evergreen Associates to give us some highlights and directions on where they feel we can spend our time in the wisest manner that we can. So, Ms. Rosell, do you want to start your presentation?
Certainly.
Yeah.
My name is Betty Russell and I'm here with Evergreen Solutions. And I was part of the original study group. And throughout the study, common council members and staff and, everyone that we spoke with had issues, charter, ordinance, and code issues, saying that it's difficult to navigate, it's difficult to find things, it's not organized well. And I personally spent the entire Thanksgiving weekend last year going through the charter page by page, trying to highlight all of the duties of the common council, all of the duties of the mayor, etc. And even after I did that and did as much as I could to ferret out what each office, committee, staff position mentioned in the charter did, I found that there was things I missed. What I found was a hodgepodge collection of statements that in some cases had nothing to do with the way that things are done in the city today. They no longer applied, and some that were in conflict or were ambiguous in regard to the overall process. I know this is not something new to you. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but all of this resulted in the finding and recommendation 2.16 in the final report. The issue that I want to point out is when I made this recommendation, I spoke to the issue of a charter revision. Initially, I thought there might be some way to fix it, and I withdrew my original thought on this and said it needs a complete rewrite. It needs to be restructured top to bottom. It needs to be organized in a clear sequence of topics. And I hope that you understand that having the role of the mayor all in one place, having the role of the common council all in one place, and so forth, was very important. Also, removing the outdated clauses, gender references, and provisions for positions like the sheriff, treasurer, selectmen, and constables that no longer operate in Norwalk. Removing them, and in some cases, there were things in the charter itself that would be better addressed in an ordinance or code or something else rather than in the actual charter. A charter is a master agreement as to how this city municipality operates, and what you have in Norwalk right now is a document that is very close to what I see in a lot of ordinances. So I felt like a complete rewrite was necessary. And then I looked at why past charter revisions had failed. And the most recent one, there were general fixes that would have taken care of some of the issues that I just spoke of. But they went down because there were other controversial issues that were brought into play, and the voters ended up throwing the entire thing out. And it was, I mean, I could not understand why the voters would vote down a provision that would remove that sheriff, constable, whatever positions when they're not in use. I just couldn't see that happening. But what I saw and everything that I read indicated that the voters, if they rejected a part, they rejected all. So there are a number of model charters put out by very reputable organizations such as the National Civic League. And I had the privilege of talking today with your general counsel, and I believe that what he has already done for you in reorganizing the current charter with all of the provisions in it into the National Civic League model is something that I could stand behind entirely. What I and that I had the opportunity to look through it this morning, but specifically the manner in which you address each of these concerns and areas of the structure of the entire charter, really, it needs to be divided into two phases. So what I see is, number one, this charter revision committee needs to focus its attention on getting a clean, workable charter, and not the restructuring of governance in the city of Norwalk today. First, go to the voters with a clean, restructured instrument that is modeled after this, which is already put into the National Civic model, and And then go about a separate charter revision for things like, should the mayor have 4 years, or should the common council have 4 years? Should this group have this or that? Take it as it is today and build a document that accurately reflects what you want to do with the way it is right now. And then come back phase 2 with charter revisions for those more controversial issues. And the reason I say that is that's what caused the last charter revision group to go down. You know, Evergreen believes that a rewrite of the charter has the potential for shaping Norwalk's future, but encourages this group to really focus on restructuring and cleaning up the document first. Then the trickle down on that alone is going to move some things out of the charter, and there is going to have to be a complete restructuring, or not complete, but there's going to be a lot of work that is going to have to end up in rewrites of ordinances accordingly. So as I see the charter itself, it authorizes the creation of departments, and then there are going to have to be a whole series of ordinances written and approved that are going to set up the departments, set the names in the way that they should be, so that they're actually describing the work that's being done in those areas and so forth. So one example, that departmental example, if you look at the template that was presented to you, the reorganized charter, you'll see in the table of contents that nothing was done in terms of the departments. So if you look under departments and department heads, what this shows is exactly what is in the charter today, just all organized and lumped together into a sequence. But what is recommended by this organization is that there is a section that authorizes the Common Council to establish city departments, offices, and agency. It neither enumerates the operating departments nor details their internal organization. You know, it sets it up. An administrative code adopted by the council is the appropriate place for the details of each department. What Evergreen found while we were on site is that a certain title had to be used, because in the charter, it used the term public works, but public works didn't necessarily describe what was occurring in public works. But by charter, they had to have that title. Well, that sort of decision needs to be an ordinance. That is not the entire structure of governance. So in this table of contents that I'm looking at, you have a general, you have your general counsel, your corporate counsel, but everything almost below that, Department of Finance, Personnel Department, Police Department, Fire Department, so forth, that needs to be an ordinance, and there needs to be clauses put in here that departments can be created, and here's the way you do it. Am I making sense, or am I causing more questions?
Well, we'll soon find out. Any member of the commission wish to ask a question at this point? I can't see. Has anybody raised their hand? Any question?
In essence, I want you to create something that the voters are going to say, that's Norwalk, and no one has got a hidden agenda inside this document. And in essence, the last time around, the voters threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I really don't want you to fall into that kind of trap again.
And neither do we, I'm sure.
Certainly, you don't want to spend your time and spin wheels, you know?
Do you have any other comment for us?
I don't. I really, I applaud you for being willing to work on this commission. I think this is probably one of the most important recommendations. As I said before, I believe this is going to shape the direction of Norwalk into the future, and you have a massive job before you. So I applaud you for being here, and if I can help in any way, let me know.
So you didn't seem to address any of the archaic language that goes back to 1913 in describing Norwalk and its districts, its taxing districts, its ward, its voting districts. And so do you have any comment on that portion of our charter?
Well, I think we need to get down to the basics. I obviously, you don't want your mayor to be able to go into anybody's home because he feels that there's some malfeasance going on in the home. And that's all detailed in the report. What I think is there's minutia in the charter, and that archaic language is part of the minutia. And I could go page by page through the charter and tell you, get rid of this, do that, do this, do that. But really and truly, what you need to do is get down to the basics and enumerate the things that are important, required by law, structurally sound, so that there is a way for the council and the mayor's office and the administration to actually make it a workable document. The way it is right now, it is archaic. It has all kinds of language in there that needs to be removed, some gender references that need to be removed. But you know, I know it's a silliness, but when I read the part about the mayor could go into anybody's house at any time and do all kinds of stuff, no, thank you. I'm not moving to Norwalk. I don't want him in my house, you know. And it's all on the assumption that something bad's going on. So I look like a bad person, and he might just get that idea, and I don't want him in my house, you know. So that's silliness, but that's the kind of archaic language that's in there.
Yeah, but I was referring more to the description of Norwalk.
Oh, I don't see that has any value. I see that there needs to be a preamble, maybe a short description, but I don't think there needs to be that level of detail. In 100 years, people are going to look at the charter and say, what's that? You know?
Well, it's
And I think it's,
been over 100, well, it's 110 years almost now, and that's being said by some people now, so. Angela?
No, I was just going to say, I think this makes really good sense, Betty, which is that the charter should be something that anybody at Norwalk can read and understand, and that it really should be a document that sort of lives beyond administrations, right? And so I really, what you said about, you know, trying to strip out the distractions, you know, to the extent that the law obviously allows, and have those dealt with separately, I think will help us really move the process forward. And if we keep sort of as our goal to make sure, as I said, this is really an understandable document by the average person in Norwalk, in terms of just governance, etc., I think that really helps guide how we move forward, because there is a lot in there, and it's been very, I mean, for me, and again, with a law degree even, very difficult to go through. So I can imagine sort of just, you know, somebody who just wants to understand how the town is run, how the city is run.
I personally do not think that the general run-of-the-mill citizen out there could take the document as it exists today and really make that decision. You know,
I'm in a good position because I actually got to work with Betty on the efficient study, and I haven't seen you since, but Kudos.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Betty. Good to, kudos to you and your group to opening eyes inside our building and now with the charter also. I know you're top notch at how you go about things and everything, and I think your input to us is going to be very important. So thank you for all the work that you've done and for taking Thanksgiving to sit down and read this. You must be a football fan because there's no way I would have done that.
I'm a sick person, you know, to sit there and read a charter over the Thanksgiving holiday. Yeah.
But thank you. I know the work that you put into this. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that comment.
Are there any other comments or questions from members? Yes.
I did have
Yeah.
one, Betty, thank you again, and I am, personally inclined to.
I think you might need to identify yourself
sorry,
for the
Tyler.
for the minutes.
Yes, Tyler Fairbank.
Yep.
I appreciate your suggestions, and I think, you know, based on what happened the last time with this and my experience in another city that had a charter revision that's what needed tank because of something that was kind of seen as political. I think that's a good approach. I was just curious what the timing of that would look like, right? So this committee was expected, I think, to wrap up by May
April, May.
23, April, May, and then have this be on the ballot in November of 23. So if we were strictly to do the approach where we kind of look at Steve's draft reorganization and treat that as the first, I mean, would that be it? So is that, and then you mentioned, you know, separate revisions down the road to address some of the other things, would the
I think Steve's thing is great. You know, I haven't read it word for word. But I see that what he did is he took the current charter and just organized it. Okay, this paragraph talks about the mayor. Let's put it over here. This one talks about the common council. Let's put it over there. So your job now is what belongs in the charter. It's really a red line, everything he gave you. And starting on page 1, you know, what do we need here and what do we not need? And I would not, I mean, adding language to clarify or to do something is okay, but more than anything, what you need to do is address the things that are legally required, redline the things you don't need, clarify the things that you need but are ambiguous in this, and get it as clean as you possibly can. And I would hope that you're thinking in terms of how to get this through the voters from day one, because what you need is a presentation when this is all over with and you are ready to present this cleaned up charter, that you could say in section 1, we gathered it all together and we decided we want the elections to look like this, we want this, we want that, and we want this. And those are the things we kept, and we tossed out everything else. Why? It's extraneous. I love the word you use. It's distracting. You know, it's a distraction from everything else. The model, if you go to the website, the model itself has some language in there. And the language I was reading to you about the departments, for example, there's model language that you could put in there. Okay, we're going to take this out, but we're going to put this in there, and that's going to move the authority from here to here.
So,
If I may,
Steve,
may I just amplify the point that Betty
Yeah,
was just making, Commissioner Fairborn, do you mind if I answer?
Oh, please do.
Okay, she's 100% correct. There's a lot of, also, let's not belittle her report, there's a lot of very, very useful language on the functions of government that could very easily be placed into the charter, eliminating specific departments, but laying out the functions and laying out the services so that the services should be delineated, the services that are expected of the government, what falls within each of the categories. The categories they've got here are operations and public works, information technology, community services, economic and community development, public safety, human resources. So when you get to the department section, what we will probably look at, and I've done this in other communities, is to lay out that there shall be departments. They shall be created by ordinance. These are the elements that should be taken into account in creating departments. That when you establish department heads, a department should be run in accordance with best practices in the field, and job description should be established in accordance with best practices in the field. What the best practices are today will be different than they might be 10 years from now or 15 years from now, but you establish in your constitutional document the best practice standard. Then you move into, instead of saying there shall be a police department, there shall be departments that address public safety. You may delineate what public safety is broadly, but you're not going to lay out the departments. And that way the members of the public can see this is what we should expect, and how does the code of ordinances, how does the budget, how do other governing documents in the community effectuate the broad constitutional standards that the charter establishes. That's what we're hoping to do. And so from a timing perspective, and we'll probably talk about this with the permission of the chair, I'll talk to her after this meeting. We'll talk a little bit the next phase of the meeting, is we need to look at our schedule, and we need to be able to start breaking down how we're going to approach each chapter. My expectation is that we'll probably bring in people in the local government. We will bring in other speakers, as I've indicated to you, and I'm going to start drafting. And I'm going to start drafting replacement language for each charter, each section that we will be able to use as a way of determining what should remain and what should not be here. With regard to the question raised by the chair, with respect to the districts, the taxing districts we're not going to be able to touch. And as you saw in my reorganization, I put the taxing districts to the back of the document, and not because that's a priority issue, but because we're probably not going to touch them. Those districts we're not going to even think about. But the council districts don't need to be delineated in the charter. The mechanism for creating the districts should be in the charter, and then the districts are established by ordinance every 10 years after the census, after the legislature does its reapportionment. And so having these districts in the charter makes no sense, because you're not amending your charter in accordance with reapportionment. You amend your charter when you get to it. And so that's how I anticipate it. And I think the schedule needs to methodically lay out our agenda chapter by chapter. As I've said before, we probably should start with the budget, because it's a good exercise. And it would be a good example to see how we build a new chapter in the document. It's probably the last chapter, one of the last chapters in the document, but it'll be a really good exercise for creating a new chapter in new language as a model for the rest of the things we will do. And probably one of the more difficult things we'll be tackling. So yes, it's going to be ambitious, but we have a finite number of meetings in our regular schedule. We may have to have additional meetings, maybe Saturday sessions, whatever, as we get to the end. But it's very, very achievable. And I think what we may end up with here is I was having a conversation with a mayor from another community the other night at the CCM dinner. And I said that this may be an opportunity to really create a model charter, because so much of what you have is archaic, not workable, that Norwalk won't have a hard time acclimating to this movement into the code of ordinance. They will have to establish departments in the code of ordinances very soon after the charter is adopted. But that would be, that should be achievable. So I think it's achievable, but we have to be very earnest about our schedule and how we prioritize the chapters and the subject matters in the document.
And the document that you have right now is 208 pages long. I would challenge you to make that a lot shorter. Because there's just too much minutia in there. So again, you have a lot of work to do. In answer to your question, do I think that the May is doable for this phase? Yes. The next phase, which is, do I want to recommend some more controversial issues? I actually addressed that in the report, and I said, make them separate items so that I can throw out this. I don't like that provision. I don't think you should do that. And but I like this number 2 and number 3. That's phase 2. So phase 1 of this is get the structure right, and then come back and don't lose it while you're doing these discussions and well, we need to address, the Board of Estimating and whatever. Okay, we want to address that, but let's don't go there in this version. Let's leave that to those more controversial issues. And then, here's item 1 on the next vote. It is, let's look at this. Now let's look at this and give the voters a chance to turn down the things they don't like and approve the things they do. But this should not be that kind of controversy. There should not be this. And I'll go back to, at the end of this, you need to have a nice, clean presentation that says, this is what we did. And it needs to be bullet, 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 and it needs to be saleable. From a marketing standpoint, what you're doing is letting the voters know that I swear to you, I did not mess with anything but getting it to a model. And I hope I'm not harping, but that's my sermonette for the night.
No, but that's important because it's like what you said
Again,
earlier.
For the minutes.
Carl Dickens. I found in working in different things in this city for the last 20 years, nobody really knows what's going on about anything. It just kind of comes from, oh, I heard, or that's the way we used to do it. That's the way we've always done it. I've coined a phrase called the Norwalk way, and that sort of stuck, but nobody really understands. So I think what you're saying is that everything, I agree with everything you said and Steve said, but it's got to be crystal clear, because if we can put out the greatest looking document in the world, it goes to the polls next November. And unless we make a valid effort for everybody to understand it, that at least is going to vote. They'll just say no because they don't know what they're voting. Or they heard that that's not the way it is, or that sort of thing. Before I be quiet, I do have one other question that I asked last week. I sat through the presentation that you guys did for council, which I thought was excellent. I'm not sure that all council people understood your presentation after it was over, having a conversation with some people. But what is the timeline that council has taken on their part of this? Was it to just form this commission, and after this commission comes up with our recommendations or a new charter, then they will take up? Because I heard things in your report, which I thought was excellent, and having seen many of these, there was parts of it that employees didn't know who they reported to. And I fell on the floor when I heard that one. But it goes that simplistic, and then it goes as complicated as it gets in higher areas. So I'm just wondering, has council grappled with any of this?
Every one of the common council members that I spoke with, and I do believe I spoke with most of them. I can't think of anyone I didn't speak with at some point in time. Every one of them knew this needed to be done, understood the issues, and every one of them had something they would like to see corrected, which I'm afraid is phase 2. So that needs to be clarified with council as to your approach to work. And as far as their involvement, that's pretty much laid out, as to what their official role is. in the process. But in my opinion, I think the more open communication you have, and I like the idea of you bringing them in for various phases when we're going through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, you know, bringing them in. I think that's really important to get their buy-in so that the rumor mill doesn't start early. And that if it does start, it's a good rumor, not a bad one.
One
Well,
of the things,
it's already, I'm sorry, but it's already begun. Certain places that I've been, and we were at the same function a couple of weekends ago. And because people knew that I was involved in this and they asked questions, and some of those that were asking questions, their names are on this 2016 document. It was amazing the number of things that they said, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I didn't comment one way or the other. I just listened to them. But I think it's already out there, but that's normal.
Yeah.
It's a village.
can I just say two things, if I may,
that-
Madam Chair?
Yeah, to that point, Yeah.
Two points. There will be new things in the charter. Because the charter currently doesn't really address hybrid meetings, for example. There are things that have occurred in the world that we live in that will have to be addressed here. One of the things I plan to propose to you, and I don't know what Betty's thoughts are on this, is that we have a definition section, a glossary section, where we define commonly used terms.
Great
You
idea.
don't have multiple uses of a term. If a majority of the a council is a majority of all members present and voting, that should be a defined term. If you want to have an alternate to that standard, then you lay out the alternate in specifics. It's a 2/3 vote, it's a 3/4 vote, whatever you want it to be. The second point that I want to make is that you don't want to have a situation. So there will be a chapter added to this charter. Let's use Betty's example of the departments. We have the departments delineated in the charter right now. My recommendation aligns with her recommendation, is that we move the departments out of the charter. Specifically, there may be some that you have to leave in. We'll talk about that. We'll get to that when we do. But the ones that are going to be moved out are going to move to a temporary chapter in the charter called the sunset provision, because you don't want to leave the city without the department during a period where the council is going to be adopting ordinances. And so I would suggest that all of the departments that are in the charter will be placed into a sunset provision, which will go away as the departments are created by ordinance, so that there's no hiccup. There's as disorganized as it is, as problematic as it is, it's what we have. And so we can't eliminate it completely because the ordinances aren't going to be adopted the day after the charter is approved. So we need to have a sunset provision. Those you will see as we're drafting. I'll be moving things into a temporary sunset chapter of the charter to make sure that there's continuity and that we don't have a problem where all of a sudden we wake up a year from next Tuesday when this charter is approved and say, oops, we don't have a government. We don't have a police department. We don't have a public works department. So those things will remain. So I wanted to explain there's a methodology to moving in the direction that Betty has suggested and that I fully think subscribe to. I think it's a really important thing. So I wanted to point that out. So there will be things that do come up that aren't in the charter because we just need to understand that the world has changed since 2016, 2006, and certainly since 1913.
What I was going to, this is Patsy Brescher speaking, is most of this discussion has been really on the functioning of the government and not the description of the city. And having lived here for 60 years and being an elected official for 6, I have a sensitivity of the depth of importance the districts are to the city. And I think that we need to deal with that issue very quickly and reinforce and just clean up those sections without any kind of major discussion of any changes. Because that's one of the main reasons why we can't get charter revision in this community. And nobody has really directly discussed that tonight. And it's a vital piece of our ability to be successful. So I think we need to focus on that and articulate our position early on in the process so that that's out to the public, and those people that are focused on those kind of things are can come aboard with what really needs to happen to modernize the actual functioning of the government. So if it's part of the charter, which is how our charter currently starts out with a description of putting all the pieces, Norwalk is like a big puzzle with pieces being put together. And that's what you have mentioned, that people don't know what the difference is and the significance of one district after another, and whether it's a taxing district or a voting district, or a section of the town that has ownership of certain major public service departments like water departments, electric departments, beaches, parks. They're owned by different districts. So that we need to address how we're going to handle that. Rick, you might, having,
No,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm,
I don't know how you feel about that, the importance of it.
yeah, I think what's happening is, like Steve had mentioned, we need to really start lining up what we're going to do.
Mhm.
And I think once we get lined up with what we need to do, it'll be our scorecard of where we go and what we need to get done. So I think as we put that together, we have to keep in mind, things that we all might want to have included, or ask Steve if this is now or this is later, or even input from Betty also, and just really start going piece by piece by piece and building our building.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but how does that, the physical description of the city play into that for you? Where would that be positioned in our?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying too, is with Steve's guidance, where we need to start putting pieces is something that he is an expert at, and I think that's where we need to look at.
Okay.
I mean, we've all heard input from outside already from our previous meetings of what they want in there and everything, but I think we have a bigger project ahead of us. So just getting a document, like Betty said, and, right now it seems like it's a comic book, and we need to make it real.
Can I ask a question?
Please do. Yeah,
Anita Wofford Raleigh.
hi.
I don't know if everybody on here are attorneys, but I am not. And so one of the things that I think has baffled me is the language.
Yes.
And how much, if you want people to understand it, people like me who are not attorneys, how much of the language can you change so that people, average people, can understand this document? I think that's been something that I've wanted to ask about, because as I read it, there are things on here that just
They don't make
don't
sense.
make sense. And so I guess that's basically my question. It's just
I want to try to
how much
draft
the
a
language
plain,
can change.
I want to try, in spite of being a lawyer, and sometimes lawyers overcomplicate things, I get it. And I understand that Shakespeare wants to kill all the lawyers. I understand all those things about lawyers. I think that we want to write a plain language charter. We want to write a charter that clearly lays out what the authority is. You want it for multiple reasons. And I think the point you just made is an outstanding point from a citizen's perspective, because ultimately this is the citizen's guide to the structure of the government. And if a citizen can't understand how a bill becomes a law, how you create an ordinance, how the budget is adopted, how the capital budget is adopted, why the departments exist, what are they here for, all those things, then it's not a very useful governing document.
Right.
Let's stop. That's really critical. And that's why we're doing this. But it's also important because members of the council need to be able to read it. And the mayor needs to be able to read it. the chief financial.
The
officer-
lawyers need to be able to read
Yeah,
it.
the lawyers, the corporation counsel needs to be able to
And
read
the
it.
town clerk.
And the town clerk needs to be, it needs to be understandable so that you eliminate as much ambiguity as you can.
Right.
Will we eliminate all ambiguity? I guarantee you we will not. We will try. But the reality is, that's what I'm hoping to accomplish here. It's a unique opportunity because what you have as your underlying document, as Betty indicated, is so archaic and out of date in so many ways, not just the language, Commissioner. It's in so many ways that we really have an opportunity to try to create something that is clearly understandable. And with regard to the chair's issue about the definition of the city, we will talk about that. I'll talk to the Corporation Council and see where the city is, where the actual structure or definition of the lines of the city, forget about the districts, but the lines of the city are. And the charter should simply reference that the city of Norwalk is comprised of the following, the territory is set forth in, and have a link to where it's set forth, wherever it is set forth, whether it's in the land records, whether it's in the special acts, we would reference it. You don't need to delineate it in the document.
Street by street,
You don't need to do it street by street.
tree
And-
by tree,
Yep,
wall by wall.
yeah, no, absolutely. And with regard to the council districts, they don't need to be in the charter at all. You need to say there are X number of council districts. They shall be established by the council every 10 years following in a reapportionment process that follows state law and federal mandates, federal constitutional standards. That's all it is. But to put them in in here again, meets and bounds, as the chair was just describing with the trees and the posts and the
Walls.
barriers and all that, it doesn't need to be in here. So my plan, and I ask all of you when I'm giving you drafts to say, Steve, we thought that you understood the English language. I want everybody to really pay attention to every word I give you to make sure that you understand it. If I'm staying up a couple levels, which I'm going to try not to, because it doesn't serve anybody's purpose to do that. And I think we have a unique opportunity here to make that happen.
Okay, all right, so you didn't weave into that discussion the taxing districts.
Well, the taxing districts, we really can't touch. We're not, I think that's what Betty didn't use the term third rail, but I look at that as a third rail issue. From my understanding, and Madam Chair, you can strike me for saying the wrong thing. I think that's an important thing to the people who care about the taxing districts. And I think if we start meddling with taxing district lines, that we're going to have some problems. And I think that I'm willing to, defer to the people who have to make the policy decisions, you, the mayor, the council, the people who are going to play a role in this. But it seems that taxing district lines are something we probably should not approach because I think it will be very, very difficult. I think that in and of itself is a full phase project. Aside from what Betty was talking about, I think that's a third phase or a fourth phase or a fifth phase. Somewhere down the line, you may want to address those issues. But for the time being, I think you need to leave the taxing districts as a third rail that we're not going to touch at this moment.
But they need to be defined, not
Yes,
touching and
right.
changing them, but let me just finish my concept before I forget it. If you don't understand that they're not simply geographic districts, but they're service districts. If you come to town and you don't know why the water bill in one part of the city is one thing and a different charge in another part of the city, if you don't understand that or can't find a reference to that concept in the charter, that leads to a lot of confusion. And in the 216, the water bill issue came up a couple of times, and that's something that's discussed consistently. But the districts need, the taxing districts need to be defined clearly here, not changed, but the language needs to be clean.
Yeah, right now, as I understand it, I'm looking at my breakdown, but right now the taxing districts are defined broadly in 1-16, but it simply says there's 6 districts, and that the boundaries, it just has broad references. So somewhere they must be defined. And I think what we do is establish a link or have a picture of the districts. I mean, if there's a breakdown of how the districts look, we can do it, but
It's
So I think we'll have
not,
to look at that.
just how they look, it is what defines them as a district is not just geographical.
right.
It's ownership of properties and services, utilities, electric departments, water departments. And that is what is so unique about Norwalk. When it was put together, obviously, as we all know, the districts own different things and they have kept their proprietary relationship and power.
So
And
where
that
are those
key.
districts found? Where do we
Well,
actually find the districts? That's what I'm
I was
asking.
just gonna ask,
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt on it either, it's Rick McQuaid. Jordan, is there a way that you can check with the taxing districts to see if they have individual charters?
Yeah,
I think
they're
that-
referenced in this, in our chart.
Right, so what I'm saying, if we get that, and that way
Yes,
we
right.
can link it to the charters of those districts, also with our description of what they are. And prevent it from becoming,
It's, yeah,
over the
the-
top of it.
right. And
Each one
that
is
we've got to just articulate clearly
Mhm.
to the constituents in Norwalk that we're defining them, articulating it. We're not changing anything because you even discuss trying to change something, that's the end of any charter revision. So, yes, sir.
Just dumb question. Why do the taxing districts have their own charter?
Steve, you want to answer that?
Well, I will take a guess at it. They were created by special act. The General Assembly did so at the time that they created the taxing districts. And they were set up as kind of independent entities within the overall governmental structure. They were incorporated in that structure, but I'd have to go back and do a historical study. But I think it's all derived from their special act authority.
Well, I think Madam Chair brings up a really good point because it is a problem. And I don't recall what the actual verbiage is in the current charter. But I know a lot of people have problems with the districts and how they were formed and why they're so different. Why is one different than five different than six, so on and so forth. And the clarity of that would go a long way.
Yes.
I mean, when you move into this town, I don't know about all of you, but I didn't, but my realtor didn't either point out that, okay, you're in taxing district X. And here's the mill rate for here.
Mhm.
Or if you're looking around where there's different mill rates, maybe the house you really like. But I mean, yeah, when we moved here, I didn't go to Westchester County because I wasn't going to spend $25,000 a year in taxes. So that took that off the list right away. So then we take a look and anyways, you funnel it down. Where are you going to live? And you decide what's your tax base? What's the mill rate there?
And
So why don't I put on my plate? I'll work with Jordan. I'll talk to the mayor's office as well and see if we could find out how they are described and where they're described and see whether or not that is something that we might want to actually place in the document if it's not 100 pages of description to make sure that we have an understanding of what those districts are.
Well, they are fairly detailed descriptions in the current charter because that's how it was put together. But you get down to if you don't live here, you don't understand the subtlety of it. But if you want streetlights on your street and you petition for streetlights, if you're not in a certain district and you don't get streetlights, you can't have them. So you have to be in a certain district, you have to have sewers, and then you have an opportunity to have streetlights if you want them. The same with garbage collection. I mean, it is so intrusive in people's personal lives. The service districts are that is it's a killer bee to getting any charter change. So we have to get really educated to that. Yes, Betty.
I love the discussion. I think this is exactly what y'all need to be doing, but I want to caution you about something. if it's legal and it's required by state or federal law, keep it. If it is something that is going to change in 5 years, 10 years, whatever, if those districts are not set in stone and cannot be changed, then leave them in there. But if you are talking about things that are fluid, some days they're doing parking, some have this, some have that. Why not approach it if it's legal? And that's what your attorney is here for. But if it's legal, can you approach it like you do the departments and line out what the process is for establishing and maintaining and whatever, and put the rest of it and have it go to another ordinance or code or something, because the charter should be like the Constitution. To change the Constitution, we don't make changes to the Constitution lightly, nor do we make a constitutional change because this year we're doing it this way and next year we're going to do it a different way. The Constitution is a framework. Your charter is a framework. And so my cautionary note to you, I'm not going to get involved in saying yay or nay, or, but my cautionary note is examine it and say, if this is going to change in 5 years, then that specificity should not be in the charter. The specificity in the charter should be how to do that next act, create this, do this, change this, whatever. And then in ordinance, it might say, the such and such district provides this and this and this. I don't know. I don't know if that's legal. I am saying to you, cautionary note, the charter should be a non-changing sort of framework for stuff that isn't changed every year on the year. Later on, you may want to insert different term limits. You may want to do, blah, blah, blah. That framework, if it's going to change every year or every 5 years or even every 10 years, think about whether it should be there or someplace else.
So can I ask the question, is this, do we consider this charter a living document?
No,
What's it considered?
I don't.
What's it considered, Steve, legally or otherwise?
I don't want to disagree with Betty because I have such admiration for her work, but a constitution, from my perspective, is a living document, and
Well,
a charter,
yes.
and a charter more so than a constitution, than a state or federal constitution. There's so many reasons why you don't want to reopen constitutions right now. But we're different than the Constitution because we don't have inalienable rights in our charters.
Right.
We don't have sovereign rights. Remember the little seminar I gave at the beginning, there are no sovereign rights in the local government. We only have those rights that are granted to us by the state. It really is our governing document. And so it lays out the framework, Betty did say this, of our government. And frankly, it's something that should be achievable. One of the reasons in a lot of my communities I put a 10-year review provision in is mainly to take a look at, are there any things that have occurred in the last 10 years? If we did the charter 10 years ago and doing the charter now, you know what we'd be focusing on? We'd be focusing on hybrid meetings and the things that came out of the pandemic that changed the way government operates. There are a lot of things that have changed there. We probably should address things like collective bargaining agreements and the impact they have on local government because they have the force of law in the state of Connecticut. And so we'd want to look at how do we interact with those, which are really, the charter is silent on that. And occasionally, as Betty says, phase 2 or phase 3, you may look at things like the term. You may look, and I'm not suggesting this, but you may look at, do we want to have a city manager as opposed to a mayor council form of government? So you may look at those things. Do we want the council to have this authority and the mayor to have that authority? And that's why you do a 10-year review, because you may make judgments that the government, they've implemented all the efficiency study recommendations, many of which are just outstanding. And we find that yes, we've done these things, but there's an impediment. And is there a way we can address that impediment? That's why you want to review your charter every few years. It shouldn't change a lot. Your ordinances should be the things that change a lot.
Right.
In real time. Your local constitution should be a governing document that people who live in the town can rely on as the form of government for a certain period of time. So, but it can change, and it does breathe. In my view, it should breathe.
You know,
It's
there's
it's a real slow breathe.
Yes, a
just
deliberate breathing. You know.
to talk about it being living in that the notice in the current charter, public notice is in a newspaper so many days. So, you know, do we add web and social media to those requirements? That, you know, that kind of thing to bring it as well as the neutral gender neutrality. Of course, when this was written in 1913, the women didn't have the right to vote. So I'll just remind everybody that that's the reality of this document. So, yeah, I see. I thought I saw somebody with their hand up.
Well,
Yeah.
I have one.
Go ahead.
I don't want
Yeah.
to dominate here, but I got a
That's
zillion,
fine.
I got a zillion questions, but I don't disagree with what Betty said. I do think what Steve said, I agree with. But I think my biggest point would be, and the reason I asked the question, is that Madam Chair pointed out that the current charter talks about how taxing district or whomever else can make their own charters to do whatever, which sounds like what, you know, the BET does to a certain extent, and that's not a knock on the BET, but it should follow somewhere. If I look at a charter that a board or a commission has put together, I think that it should follow something close to what the, you know, be ecumenical here, but what the Bible of the city is all about. And basically that's what this is to a certain extent. And it's just a lot, which I think leads to the overall ambiguity in this town about getting a lot of things done. So that was my purpose.
And to this archaic city that or our government, which is very complicated. Now I just lost, I was thinking of something else that we're saying and I lost, but that's okay.
But to make a point to Carl's, the commissioner's point, if I'm not call him Commissioner Dickens for the
Yeah,
purposes of our record, the point that the commissioner is making is a point well taken. Every department, every board and commission, the mayor, the council, the BET have to comply with the charter, period. Any policies or regulations that they adopt at the Planning and Zoning Commission, at the BET, anywhere, have to comply with either the charter, or in some cases, superior state law, if state law manages them day to day. The taxing districts are a different entity, but with regard to the departments, there is no separate charter for the BET. The BET follows the lines of the charter. What the charter says it does, it does. What the mayor is given authority to do, he or she must do. Council as well. And so I want to make that point absolutely clear. There are no separate charters for anybody in the government of the city of Norwalk. There's only one charter, and that's what we're working on. The taxing districts are a different entity and different body, and I'm gonna have to learn much more
Yeah.
about it.
Well-
But they have separate rules that were granted by the General Assembly, and we'll have to understand those. But
and rights, for instance, they
Right.
have different ability to
privileges,
bond.
yeah.
They have ability to bond, and you know, one they can bond 250,000, another one 40,000. This is going back to 1913. So they have power, and they are protective of that power, and we have to respect where we are with it and understand the emotional aspect of it in the community of our district system.
Betty's got her hand up.
Oh, Betty?
I will amend my earlier statement, and I agree wholeheartedly with Steve in regard to it is a breathing document, but it should be the last thing that gets modified, not the first thing. And I think that order and hierarchy that Steve described is really important. Federal law, state law they can make all the state laws they want, but they can't violate federal law in doing so. And so there's a hierarchy that goes down through this. And my caution is really build a document that doesn't have to be amended all the time.
Mhm.
Mhm,
I agree.
definitely.
Any other
To
comments
underscore
or
Betty's
questions?
point,
Steve, yeah.
if you take a look, page 49 of her report, she lays out the hierarchy. The only thing I would add to the hierarchy under the state law category is the effect of collective bargaining agreements. A lot of people
That's
don't,
probably,
yeah, do not take that into account. And I am telling you, collective bargaining agreements have the force of law, and we could work our tails off on creating something in the charter. And a year later, there could be a collective bargaining agreement that's approved by the mayor and the council that totally abrogates the provision of the charter. That is a power they have. So yes, we need to understand those things.
Absolutely.
Um,
Michael?
Okay.
yes. Are we gonna add a section basically in this charter about stating like every 10 years, this charter needs to be updated or should be updated?
Is that a motion?
No, I'm saying, I'm saying is that like we're gonna probably like should add a section in.
Actually,
Yeah,
Michael,
I'll
that brings
recommend,
us-
I'll be recommending that
Yeah.
to you. And I'll recommend one other thing. I think you should do a mandatory ordinance review every 5 years. And I think you should do a mandatory ordinance review every time you change the charter. A lot of my communities are derelict. We pass these wonderful charters. I won't name the city, but I have a charter. Remember I talked a few minutes ago about the sunset provision?
Yes.
I have a charter that's coming up for its 10-year review. 9 years ago, we did 3 major changes that align with what Betty's advice is and what my advice is with regard to departments. And we moved them into a sunset provision. And I just reminded the legislative leaders of that town, you've done nothing to change it. And so we just put into the Hartford Charter, hopefully it will pass next Tuesday, an automatic 5-year review for ordinances and an automatic review for ordinances after a charter revision. Because you look at your ordinances, I don't know if Betty did a deep dive into them, and I have not, but if you look at the ordinances of almost any community, I have a community that moved away from the city manager form of government 20 years ago, and they still have references to a city manager in their
in the chart.
so,
Yeah.
no, in their ordinances. The charter, we cleaned that. I was a charter council. We cleaned it up in the charter, I guarantee you. The ordinances
Oh,
still reference city manager. So, yeah, so so I would say to Commissioner Witherspoon, 10 years for your charter, 5 years, every 5 years for your ordinances and after a charter revision.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of planning our next step, and Steve and I talked a little bit about it, but we've had a lot of expressions of interest from many of the governing officials in town, and along with the Evergreen report. So I think if we put a suggested, Steve and I put it over the next 2 weeks, put a list together of everything that's been commented on, and then we could have a general discussion of prioritizing those along with Steve's original recommendation of how we go through the charter. But to get those correlated in one place, and we decide, yes, we want to address this, and maybe using a simple thing is the gender neutrality piece. I think we could all immediately have an opinion on that one way or the other, and that's done. You don't have to talk about it again. You know, the simple things we can knock off, and then we get into really some good discussions next meeting. Does anybody else have an idea of doing anything differently? or expanding on that idea?
I
Please
will
go ahead.
I will draft for the chair's approval, a comment, what I call a comment grid that has all the comments that have come in thus far. I'll try to place them in the chapters that they would fall in, so you have a sense of where they fall, and that will help us build our schedule. So I'll get that to the chair within the week, and
Okay.
we'll be ready to go to you within the 2 weeks. So that will be my workload.
And so if we're thinking in terms of starting with the finance portion of the charter first, would we want to call in any of the department heads to discuss that right away, or have a meeting first and then bring them in? What would your recommendation be on that?
My recommendation is our next meeting, why don't we lay out the schedule? If finance is the first, I definitely think you want to bring the finance officials in at your first meeting so they can tell us what the history is right now. What do they do today?
Right.
And then what will make their lives easier? What will make things easier for the public to understand in the process? So I think they are the point of departure. Based on what happens at that meeting, I may make recommendations to bring in, if we want to take a look at things that are in other communities, bring in a few finance people from other communities to say, hey, we got this thing here. We got this thing. This works well. We have this other thing. Again, not structural, not a change, not talking about any elimination of roles or responsibilities, but where there are things we may want to throw into the budget document that isn't in your charter right now, that aren't controversial, but that do give more qualitative information to the finance people, to the BET, and to the council and the mayor. That might be useful that I've been working on in other communities throughout the state. But I think we start with our CFO, probably with somebody, the mayor or somebody from the mayor's office, and maybe leadership, the finance folks from the council, to really have a panel discussion with the people who do the work right now, who know the charter right now, and they can lay out what they think works, what doesn't work. And then the next step would be at the end of that meeting, or at the meeting immediately after, you give me a sense of, here's where we think we need to go. If we need more outside help, I'll just bring people in for that meeting. And then I'll start drafting. I'll start drafting to try to accommodate the thought of gender neutrality. And I'll add to gender neutrality plain language, as the commissioner mentioned earlier. Commissioner Raleigh mentioned earlier that we really should have this in plain language. So it'll be a good experiment to see whether I can actually write something that's clear for everybody to understand, and that we actually tackle a good substantive area of the document.
I think the majority of the commission are non-attorneys. So we'll be at you.
Thank the deity for that. I think that's a great thing.
I'm concerned about timing with the finance department. They're starting their process now. And they're going into a heavy time of the year. So do we get them in 2 weeks or in a month? Because they get just overwhelmed at this time of year.
It's your call.
I
They're
just-
not going to get less overwhelmed throughout the course of the year because the budget process goes on.
This
we
is,
could-
crunch time, yeah.
Yeah, but if we want to do a preliminary on that at the next meeting on the 16th, if we could pull them all together, I don't have a problem. I thought it would be more useful to really lay out our schedule and have a feel for how the schedule is going to work. But if you want to have them at the next meeting, Madam Chair, I'm more than happy to work with the administration and put that together.
I have a question, but I think Benita had one ahead of me.
Okay,
So-
Benita?
I was just wondering about like a dictionary type of thing that would be useful for people to understand the language.
I mentioned earlier that I want to have a definition provision, a glossary, a definition provision at the beginning of the charter. I'm not going to do it now. I will do it as we get into the drafting, because I don't want to build a glossary based on what's in the current charter. I want to build a glossary based on what we do.
Okay.
And so absolutely, Commissioner, that is a top priority, a top recommendation that I make to all my commissions. And as you see, the charters I've worked on the last few years, They are there. Hartford never had one. If it's adopted, next Tuesday, they will have it. Fairfield as well has a very detailed glossary. And it's really useful because let's just think of the term notice, public notice. What is that? And do you need newspaper notice? A lot of the old charters have newspaper notice. Well, the newspapers want it because it's a good source of revenue, but it's not really necessary legally from a state perspective, FOI perspective, to have it. Let's define notice in a broad sense so that the clerks, the town clerk's office, or is it the city or town clerk's office that issues the notices, whatever office issues the notices,
City.
city clerk issues the notices. They define the terms. You leave it the discretion to the city clerk unless they're instructed otherwise. If the council feels something should be in a newspaper, instruct them to put it in the newspaper. If the mayor wants to put it in the newspaper, tell the clerk, I want it in the newspaper. But let's not make things mandatory. One of Betty's really good points in their report had to do with the paper, the volume of paper that government officials see. And the idea of being able to go to links to be able to get the documents from a link. I mean, there may be people who need to see the paper, and if they want the paper, then they should be given the paper. But as a rule, you should try to minimize that. So yeah, the glossary is an absolute priority for me as we go through this process.
But you just said as a town clerk or city clerk, and that's another point. Why are we a town and why are we a city? Or
what are we?
what exactly? So that might be something we discuss.
You don't want to go there. It's a complicated question, and all the big cities have cities and town clerks.
Especially with the town clerk sitting here.
Yeah, because historically they're delineated that way. In some places, the city and town clerk is one and the same.
Right.
And in other places, it's separate. Bridgeport, it's separate. Norwalk, it's separate. New Haven, it's consolidated. Hartford, it's consolidated. But in Hartford, the city council appoints the city and town clerk. It's not elected and not appointed by the mayor, but appointed by the council, which is a relic from their city manager days, is what it comes down to. And we haven't changed that. So, and whether you're a city or a town, you are a city, but that's really defined by the state. The town of Hamden is the 11th or 12th largest city in municipality in the state. Town of Fairfield's the 11th. They're both around the same size. They're still called towns, but the city of West Haven, which is half the size, is a city. It's because the state granted it. Do we want to go to the legislature right now? I don't think that's a priority. So you're considered a city, but there's relics of the past, having a town clerk and a city clerk. And you may look at functions and things like that, but I think that to start getting into the definitions of that may be a little.
And a lot of it, town clerk is governed by the state anyway, by the secretary of the state. So
Exactly.
There'll be charter changes and general assembly things that would need to be done. I don't think it can be done in a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
Well, there needs to be clarity. That's another thing that Betty's report did talk about. is-
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
Betty and I did talk about that.
Yeah. And I think as we're writing the charter, we should make sure, because
Yeah.
those positions are positions that will be stated in the charter because they're different than departments. They
Mhm.
have state functions. One has state functions, other has more of a clerical function. But those need to be defined so the public can see what the difference is. And I'm telling you, Tyler, Commissioner Fairburn used to work in Bridgeport. And I was never sure what the city clerk did and what the town clerk did in Bridgeport. And I know something about government. So I think we need to really make that clear in your
Yeah.
charter as well.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's anything else?
I was just saying, as far as the next meeting, I will actually be heading to Portugal, so I will not be at the
Oh,
next meeting.
wow.
No, I'm not upset.
Well, we'll miss you. We'll miss you. Just some clerical things. Has everybody received the Evergreen report? All the commissioners?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
I think we were going to
I
be,
don't have.
I'll email it again.
Okay.
and also we had talked about getting better maps of the wards, the districts. Just so that we know we have them in front of us when we start talking about it. And the third thing is the minutes from the 216 commission. Does everyone have them? Okay. So they went out in 2 different emails.
I have,
Yeah,
I do believe them. Yeah, I received them.
yeah, and there was a total of 5. Just to make, I just want to make sure that everybody has them. And I do think if you haven't read them, they're very instructive. And you can, you know, see where they struggled with certain issues and interesting enough, those are a lot of the issues that caused the charter revision to fail.
Yep.
So I think it's very helpful for us to brush up on those. Any other suggestions from any commissioners? Okay, I guess then a motion to adjourn is in order. Oh, Steve?
What do we want to do at the next meeting? Do we want to discuss schedule, or do you want to, do we want to start
I-
delving into the finance?
We're going to compile all of the comments so far. And, yeah, and I think if possible, the simple things we might discuss, we try to prioritize the ones, but if there are things that we can be definitive about, that we don't want to tackle this issue, we want to rewrite it so that it's readable and understandable. So that we don't waste our time moving forward, we get more directed. And then finance, because I think we sort of agreed that under your guidance, that's the department to start with.
So we'll start with finance on 12/7, then basically at the meeting after.
I'm sorry, on December, I couldn't hear what you
On
said.
December 7th. Yes,
Yeah.
okay, good. All right, excellent. I will do my homework. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So motion to adjourn. I
so
think,
moved.
okay, I see a whole bunch of hands up there.
Second.
So,
And
all those
off
in
the
favor?
record, read Betty's report. It really is good. It's, and you're going to be seeing, or don't read the report because you'll think I'm a genius, because I'm going to be taking a lot of things from the report. There's a lot of very good stuff in that report that we should be looking at through this process.
Thank you. Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you. Bye,
And,
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Take
Thank
care.
you.
All right.